Ethan Sullivan stood in the living room of his modest Boston home, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with Lena's possessions. His late wife had been gone for 3 months, ever since a car accident on a rainy night took her life, or so everyone believed. The authorities never found her body, just the twisted metal of her car at the edge of a ravine. Now, as he prepared to pack away the last traces of her existence, an unsettling thought kept echoing in his mind. Why did everything feel so unfinished? Sunlight filtered through the half-drawn blinds, illuminating flecks of dust drifting in the air. The room, usually alive with the warmth of family, felt eerily silent. The couch where Lena once napped on Sunday afternoons now looked like an abandoned relic. Photographs on a nearby shelf showed Ethan, Lena, and their daughter Sophie in happier times, vacations at the beach, birthday celebrations, casual Sunday mornings. Each image told a story of a life that seemed ordinary and loving, but now those memories felt like fragile illusions. Margaret Maggie Sullivan, Ethan's mother, entered quietly. She wore a simple cardigan and had the kind of weathered grace that came from decades of life experiences. Her eyes locked on Ethan, noticing how he paused every few minutes to stare at an old photo or run his fingers over Lena's dresses. It wasn't just grief she saw in her son, it was something else, a deep, gnawing uncertainty. She spoke in a steady voice. "Ethan, maybe we should take a break. You haven't eaten since morning." He sighed, looking up from a box of Lena's books. "I'm not hungry. I keep thinking I'll find some clue in her things, some explanation." Maggie walked over and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know it's hard, son, but you need to look after yourself for Sophie's sake." At the mention of his 8-year-old daughter's name, Ethan's eyes momentarily softened. Sophie had been the anchor, keeping him from plunging into utter despair. She was upstairs, likely reading a storybook or playing with her stuffed animals. He hated the thought of her carrying the weight of losing her mother at such a young age. Maggie cleared her throat. "I never told you this because I didn't want to add to your worries, but I always had a feeling about Lena. Something about her seemed distant, like she was carrying a secret." Ethan looked at his mother, disbelief creeping into his expression. "Mom, what are you talking about? Lena was—" He stopped himself, realizing he didn't have the words to finish the sentence. The mention of a secret tugged at a hidden fear he had tried to ignore. Before Maggie could respond, the sound of rapid footsteps on the stairs broke the tension. Sophie appeared in the living room doorway, her eyes wide. She clutched a small cell phone in her hand. "Daddy, look!" she said, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. Ethan straightened and held out his hand. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sophie stepped forward, showing him the phone's screen. A single text message glowed ominously. "Your mom is alive, and she is bad." His heart pounded. Someone had typed those words to an innocent child. He felt a rush of protectiveness, then confusion. This was impossible. Lena was gone. They had the crash site, the investigations, all the formalities. Yet a strange new doubt settled over him. Maggie gasped quietly. She didn't say it out loud, but her expression spoke volumes. Could this be connected to the secret I suspected? Ethan forced a calming tone for Sophie's sake. "It's probably just a prank, sweetie. Let's not worry about it." But the moment he reassured her, a chill ran through him. Prank or not, someone wanted to plant the idea that Lena was out there, and that she was dangerous. A sense of urgency formed. He guided Sophie back upstairs, promising her that everything would be fine. After she closed her bedroom door, Ethan turned to Maggie. "Who would do this? And why would anyone say Lena is alive?" Maggie's eyes met his. "I don't know, Ethan, but if there's even a chance—" She didn't finish the thought. Torn between disbelief and a dark curiosity, Ethan decided to search through the boxes more carefully. He rummaged through Lena's belongings, checking pockets of jackets, notebooks, and diaries, anything that might hold a clue. For a moment, he felt ridiculous. Then he spotted a small leather wallet he had never seen before. Inside it lay a folded receipt from a luxury hotel, dated March 17th. That was just a week before Lena's accident. Scrawled on the back of the receipt was a note that read, "Meet me at 8 p.m., no excuses." The handwriting looked rushed, unfamiliar. A jolt of anxiety ran through Ethan. Who had Lena been meeting in secret? And why had she never mentioned going to a hotel? He stayed silent, but the questions swirled in his mind like a storm. Had Lena been living a life he knew nothing about, or was this all a misunderstanding? With trembling hands, he placed the receipt on the coffee table. It was then that his phone buzzed. Hoping for an update from a friend or relative, he picked it up. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Ethan answered, pressing the phone to his ear. Nothing but silence, and the faintest sound of breathing. "Hello?" Ethan said, a hint of frustration in his voice. "Who is this?" The line went dead. He stood there, paralyzed by a sudden mix of dread and confusion. The day's discoveries piled onto his grief like layers of suffocating fog. He had no idea what to believe anymore. In the fading afternoon light, Ethan gazed at the note on the hotel receipt, the corners of the paper curling upward. Something was terribly wrong, and he knew that ignoring it would not make it go away. The final straw came when he turned back to see Maggie looking at him with worry. He realized that, for Sophie's sake, he had to dig deeper, even if it meant uncovering truths that could shatter what little peace they had left. As evening closed in, an air of tension settled over the house. Outside, the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one, like silent witnesses to Ethan's unraveling world. And upstairs, a little girl fell asleep clutching her phone, wondering if her mother might actually be out there somewhere. Morning arrived with a muted sunrise, gray clouds skimming across the Boston skyline. Ethan barely slept. Questions about Lena crowded his thoughts. He found himself pacing the living room floor, replaying the words on that text, "Your mom is alive and she is bad." Around 7 a.m., he forced himself to set aside his anxiety and prepare Sophie for school. Over a quick breakfast of cereal, she asked if everything was okay. Her innocent gaze cut right through him, but he lied with fatherly reassurance. "Just grown-up stuff, sweetheart. You have nothing to worry about." Inside, he felt tangled in uncertainty. After sending Sophie off on the school bus, Ethan sat at the kitchen table. The hotel receipt from March 17th spread out before him. Maggie, always an early riser, joined him. "I called my neighbor, who happens to know a detective," she said. "Her name is Valeria Morales. She's ex-military and has a reputation for being tough but fair. Maybe she can help." Ethan nodded, desperation eroding his pride. "Yes, please. Anything to figure out what's going on." By late morning, he found himself standing outside a small, unremarkable building near the Boston Police Department. Detective Valeria Morales worked in a specialized investigations unit, a far cry from the typical precinct. She had agreed to see him on short notice, more out of courtesy to Maggie's friend than professional duty. Morales greeted him in a cramped office. She was in her mid-30s, with hair tied back and a determined look in her dark eyes. She wore a simple black blazer over a crisp blouse, projecting confidence and skill. Her handshake was firm, her gaze assessing. "Mr. Sullivan," she began, gesturing for him to sit, "I understand you have some concerns about your wife's death." Ethan took a breath. "I know how this sounds. She died in a car accident, but her body was never found. Now someone claims she's alive. My daughter got a message saying Lena is bad, and I've discovered suspicious things, like a receipt from a hotel she never mentioned." Morales leaned forward. Could it be a hoax? There are scams out there, especially targeting people who've lost loved ones. I'm not saying that's what it is, but it's common. He hesitated, aware of how paranoid he might sound. "There's more," he said, opening a folder of bank statements. He pointed to the date just before the crash, highlighting large withdrawals made from his and Lena's joint account. "She drained thousands of dollars, almost all of our savings. I didn't notice until recently because I was too broken, I suppose." The detective studied the statements. Her expression shifted slightly, tinged with curiosity. "That's a significant amount of money? Did you confront her about it before the accident?" "Never got the chance," Ethan replied. I only learned about these withdrawals last night. If Lena was in some kind of trouble, I don't know what to think anymore." Morales glanced at him, her skepticism softening. "All right, I'll see what I can do, but I need to be clear. You're telling me you think your deceased wife staged her own death? Or at least someone wants us to believe she did?" He shrugged, feeling the sting of his own words. "I don't know, I need answers." After the meeting, Ethan felt partially relieved. He walked out of the building with a faint sense of hope that maybe the detective could uncover something, but the relief didn't last. His phone vibrated again with an unknown number. This time he answered with a trembling hand. A low voice crackled on the line. "Stay away from that hotel, Sullivan, or you'll regret it." Fear seized him. "Who are you?" he demanded, but the caller hung up instantly. A swirl of dread coursed through him. Someone knew he was investigating Lena's past, and they wanted to stop him. That afternoon, ignoring the warning, Ethan did the very thing the mysterious caller told him not to do. He visited the luxury hotel listed on the receipt. The lobby was grand, filled with marble floors and hushed conversations. He approached the front desk, showing the date from the receipt and Lena's name. The clerk typed for a moment, then frowned. "I see a reservation under Lena Sullivan for March 17th, yes, but there's no payment method on file. It was settled in cash." Ethan's heart pounded. He tried to maintain a calm exterior. "Was anyone else with her?" The clerk hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir, I'm not at liberty to say. Unless you have a subpoena or an official request from law enforcement, I can't share guest details." Before Ethan could press further, a tall man in a dark suit stepped away from a nearby armchair, as if he had been listening. He moved closer, his expression oddly knowing. "You must be Lena's husband," he said, voice low. "She's not who you think she is." Ethan stared at the stranger. "Do I know you?" A cold smile spread across the man's lips. "No, but you should go home. This is bigger than you realize. If you value your daughter's safety, you'll stop asking questions." Ethan's body went rigid. Fear, anger, and confusion spiraled inside him. "What do you know about my daughter?" The man glanced around, noticing a passing security guard. He leaned in and whispered, "Lena was in deep trouble. Debt, deals, who knows? She thought she could cheat dangerous people. Now you're stepping into her mess." With that, the stranger slipped away, disappearing behind a corridor that led to the lounge area. Ethan stood there, pulse racing, torn between chasing after him and confronting hotel security. Ultimately, he realized how unprepared he was. What if this man was armed? What if he was not alone? Shaken, he rushed out of the hotel and called Morales. She listened patiently to his frantic explanation, then told him to stay calm and forward any details he could remember about the man's appearance. She also insisted that if he felt threatened, he should step aside and let the police handle it. But Ethan couldn't just go home and pretend everything was fine. He drove to pick up Sophie from school, the memory of the stranger's warning replaying in his mind. Lena was in deep trouble. Debt deals with dangerous people. Could that explain the missing money? Could it be why she might have faked her death? Or was she simply running from something far more sinister than financial issues? By the time he and Sophie got home, the late afternoon sky was growing dark. Maggie greeted them with a worried look. Sophie darted upstairs, unaware of the storm brewing around her father. Maggie pulled Ethan aside. "What happened?" He told her everything, the phone call, the man in the hotel, the mention of danger. Her face paled. "We need to protect Sophie," she said. "I feel it in my gut. Lena's secrets are unraveling." Ethan nodded, exhaustion and panic etched in his features. He recalled the moment he'd seen Lena for the last time. She had kissed him goodbye, running late to meet a friend. A day later, the police informed him of her fatal crash. Now, every memory felt tainted by suspicion. Late that night, Ethan tucked Sophie into bed. She reached out and held his hand. "Daddy, are you sad about Mom?" Her innocent question tore at his heart. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah, honey, I miss her." Sophie hesitated, then whispered, "I miss her too. But sometimes I think she's not really gone." Those words lingered long after Sophie fell asleep. Ethan stood at the bedroom door, listening to the rhythmic sound of her breathing. He realized that if there was any chance Lena was alive, he had to uncover the truth, even if it meant confronting the possibility that his wife had lived a double life, one that put them all in danger. The following day, Ethan woke before dawn. Sleep had become a luxury he could no longer afford, his thoughts consumed by the looming questions about Lena. He decided it was time to dig deeper into the bank statements, hoping to find a clue hidden in the long lists of debits and credits. Daylight gradually lit the house, and Maggie joined him in the living room. Together, they pored over each transaction. Again and again, Ethan's gaze landed on a series of large withdrawals spread out over several weeks before Lena's accident. Thousands of dollars were siphoned from their accounts in increments too substantial to ignore. Yet there were also strange deposits of smaller amounts, possibly from an unknown source. "This is so out of character," Ethan said, frustration evident in his voice. "Why would she do this?" Maggie frowned. If she was in debt to dangerous people, she might have been trying to buy time or pay them off. A sudden realization made Ethan's stomach churn. What if that's not all? What if she was involved in something illegal? Before Maggie could respond, the phone rang. Ethan's heart pounded at the sight of an unknown number. He answered cautiously, expecting another threat. Instead, a muffled voice said, "Ethan Sullivan, right? I have information about Lena. She owes a lot of money, and people want it back. Now they're looking at you." Panic mingled with anger. "Who are you? How do you know this?" The voice disregarded his questions. "Get your daughter somewhere safe," it said, then the call dropped. Ethan glanced at Maggie. "We should take Sophie to your place. At least for a while, she'll be out of the city." They agreed, and within an hour, Sophie was packed and sitting in the back seat of Maggie's car. She seemed more confused than scared, sensing the tension in the air. Ethan forced a reassuring smile, promising to join her soon. Once Maggie's car disappeared down the street, he gripped the steering wheel of his own car and let out a shaky breath. He had one more stop to make before following them, a meeting with Detective Valeria Morales. She had called earlier, intrigued by the pattern in Lena's financial records. The drive to the police annex building felt longer than usual, his mind racing with every scenario. Inside Morales' office, the detective motioned for him to take a seat. "I've been running a preliminary check on the bank accounts. Some are linked to shell companies. All closed shortly after your wife's accident." Her expression grew grave. "Ethan, this goes beyond typical debt. Lena may have been laundering money, or at the very least assisting someone who was. People who operate in those circles don't take betrayal kindly." He struggled to reconcile this revelation with the woman he had loved. "So, Lena was mixed up with criminals?" "It's starting to look that way," Morales said gently, noticing his distress. "But we still need proof. If she orchestrated her own disappearance, we have to find out why." Just then, Ethan's phone pinged with a text message from Maggie. "Are you home? Call me ASAP." He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. Immediately, he dialed Maggie's number. Her voice came through, trembling. "Ethan, someone's been lurking around the house. The neighbors saw a car parked outside, windows tinted. It drove off when they approached. I'm worried." Dread sank into Ethan's chest. "Don't worry. Just stay inside. Keep Sophie close. I'll head over soon." Back in Morales' office, Ethan explained what had happened. The detective pursed her lips. "You need protection. Let me send a patrol car to your mother's house." Ethan nodded. "Please do. I don't want Sophie at risk." Though Morales tried to keep him there for more questions, he insisted on leaving to ensure Maggie and Sophie were safe. On the drive to his mother's house, he couldn't shake the feeling that every passing car might be filled with dangerous eyes. Lena's secrets were quickly becoming his reality, and the stakes were no longer just financial. They were life and death. Upon arriving, Ethan checked the neighborhood for the suspicious car. Nothing stood out. Inside, Maggie looked visibly relieved, while Sophie was anxious and clingy. The small child asked, "Daddy, is everything going to be okay?" He scooped her into a reassuring hug. "Yes, sweetheart, it will be. I promise." His voice wavered just enough that Maggie noticed. After dinner, while Sophie played with her toys in another room, Ethan paced the living room, trying to figure out what more he could do. Morales had a few leads, but building a case would take time. Meanwhile, the criminals seemed to be closing in. Just as he began to collect his thoughts, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a text message from an unknown number. "TikTok, Ethan. If Lena owed you money, wouldn't you be looking for it too?" He stared at the words, his heart pounding. The intimidation was relentless. He immediately showed Maggie, who pressed her hand over her mouth in worry. "They're taunting you," she whispered. His instincts screamed that he should leave the city. But would that really solve anything? Where could he run that these people couldn't find him? He looked at Sophie, who was now nibbling on a cookie and petting her stuffed rabbit, oblivious to the peril swirling around her. That night, Ethan tried to settle in the guest bedroom, but sleep refused to come. Each creak of the old house felt like a potential intruder. He replayed events from the past week in his mind. Lena's hidden receipt, the phone calls, the warnings, and the monstrous possibility that his wife had been leading a double life. He got up and went outside to the porch, thinking fresh air might clear his head. The sky was overcast, a faint moon hidden behind shifting clouds. As he stared into the darkness, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A car turning the corner at the end of the block, headlights momentarily illuminating the sidewalk. A spike of adrenaline shot through him, but the car continued on, disappearing from sight. Ethan exhaled slowly. The stress was taking a toll on him. He pressed a hand against the porch railing, feeling the chipped paint under his palm. "I'm in over my head," he thought, "but I have no choice but to keep going." Morning would bring new challenges, new threats, and perhaps new leads. He needed a plan. Lena's secrets, whatever they were, had placed a target on his family's back. Determination stirred within him. No matter the cost, he would protect Sophie and uncover the truth about Lena, even if it destroyed every cherished memory he had of the woman he once believed he knew. Ethan Sullivan awoke to the first rays of sunlight filtering through the thin curtains of his mother's house. He rubbed his eyes, vaguely aware that he had finally fallen asleep just a couple of hours before. The events of the past days weighed on him like a physical burden. Lena's mysterious withdrawals, ominous phone calls, and the menacing sense of being watched. Yet none of it prepared him for the terror that was about to strike. Downstairs, Maggie was preparing breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with her tense energy. Sophie, on the other hand, had already run into the backyard to play with a stray cat she had befriended the previous day. It was a small patch of lawn surrounded by a rickety wooden fence, offering just enough space for a child's imagination to roam. Ethan stepped outside to call Sophie in for breakfast, but paused when he realized she was not in sight. He scanned the yard, empty. A flare of annoyance rose in him. Sophie knew she wasn't supposed to wander off, especially with everything going on. He took a few more steps, his pulse quickening. No sign of her. He peered over the fence along the edge of the bushes and around the parked cars in the narrow alley. "Sophie?" he called, voice trembling despite his efforts to remain calm. Silence. The only response was the distant hum of traffic. Suddenly, Maggie rushed out the back door, alarmed by the urgency in his voice. "What's wrong?" Ethan fought to keep himself composed. "I can't find her. She was just here." Together, they began a frantic search around the block, checking every corner and calling her name. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness until it became clear that Sophie was nowhere to be found. Maggie's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God, Ethan! She couldn't have just disappeared on her own. What if—" Her words trailed off, but the implication was all too clear. The threats they had received, the men lurking around, it all pointed to a horrifying conclusion. Someone had taken Sophie. Ethan's phone rang at that moment. He almost dropped it in his haste to answer. An unknown number again. A distorted, cold voice crackled through the line. "We have your daughter. If you ever want to see her again, bring us Lena's money. No cops, no tricks. You have 48 hours." His knees threatened to buckle, and Maggie steadied him by the arm. You can't do this," he choked out, desperation flooding his voice. "Tell me she's okay." A low chuckle resonated on the other end. "She's fine for now, but time is ticking, Sullivan. Don't test us." Then the line went dead. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. When he turned to Maggie, his eyes were wild and he felt a wave of helpless rage. "We have to call Detective Morales," he said, forcing the words out as if they might somehow calm the tempest inside him. Maggie nodded, tears of panic streaming down her face. "Yes, hurry." They raced inside and Ethan dialed Valeria Morales' personal number. She answered on the second ring. Her voice, typically cool and measured, crackled with alarm the moment she sensed Ethan's panic. "Slow down, Sullivan. Tell me what happened," Morales insisted. Between ragged breaths, Ethan explained Sophie's disappearance and the phone call. He could practically hear the detective's mind working on the other end of the line. "Listen," she said firmly. "Do not do anything rash. I'm calling in backup. We'll handle the ransom demands carefully. We can't let them vanish with Sophie." Despite her professional resolve, Ethan could detect a note of sympathy in her tone. Hanging up, he found himself pacing, restlessly shifting from one foot to another, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Within an hour, Morales arrived with a small team of trusted officers. They set up a makeshift command post in Maggie's living room, laptops and communication devices scattered across the coffee table. A tension-filled hush settled over the house. Maggie retreated to the kitchen, wringing her hands. She tried to keep busy, making coffee for the officers who politely refused, too absorbed in the crisis. Every so often, she pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, eyes glazed with worry. Morales pulled Ethan aside to a quieter corner. "These people want money," she said, voice hushed. "We need to figure out what Lena's money means. Have you found anything else about her finances?" Ethan shook his head, frustration twisting his features. "Only that she drained our accounts. She might have stashed it somewhere, but I haven't found a dime, and now they expect me to hand over something I don't even have." The detective's expression hardened. "They're not bluffing. They have Sophie, and they'll hurt her if they think you're useless. We need leverage. Give me the details of every transaction you discovered. Maybe we can trace something." As they spoke, an officer came forward. "We're getting no hits on the usual channels. The kidnappers seem to be using burner phones and encrypted messages." Morales exhaled in frustration. "Keep trying. They'll contact us again soon enough with instructions for the ransom drop. We have to be ready." Ethan's phone buzzed. The entire room froze. He picked it up, feeling a cold sweat on his brow. This time it was a text message. "Warehouse on Harlan Street, midnight. Bring the money, come alone, or your daughter will suffer." The words clamped around Ethan's heart like a vice. He looked at Morales. "They gave a location." She scanned the message. "This could be a trap. They'll likely have lookouts to spot any police presence." A swirl of conflict rose within Ethan. He couldn't bear the thought of Sophie in danger, yet he also knew going there alone might be walking straight into his own doom. Morales seemed to read his thoughts. "We'll try to set up a discreet operation. It's risky, but it's our best shot at rescuing Sophie without them catching on." Ethan nodded, grappling with a nauseating mixture of dread and determination. "We have to do whatever it takes." The night arrived too quickly. Harlan Street was located in an industrial zone on the outskirts of Boston, its empty warehouses looming under flickering streetlights. Morales prepped a small tactical team. Their plan was to remain hidden until they confirmed Sophie was present, then move in. Ethan waited in Maggie's living room, adrenaline pulsing through his veins as midnight approached. He had texted the kidnappers, claiming he was on his way. His mind felt like a swarm of bees, frantic, disorganized, and stinging him with guilt and fear. Finally, Morales tapped him on the shoulder. "It's time." The drive to the warehouse district was ominous, the streets nearly deserted. Ethan parked where instructed, a crumbling lot strewn with debris, and stepped out, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Inside the bag, he had only a few bundled bills and worthless paper stuffed to mimic more cash. He prayed they wouldn't inspect it too closely before he could see Sophie. The air was chilly, and a faint wind carried the scent of old concrete. Morales and her team stayed a few blocks away, radios in hand, ready to move at the signal. Ethan walked into the warehouse yard, heart pounding so loudly he was sure the kidnappers could hear it. The building loomed ahead, a monolithic structure with broken windows. Its metal doors stood partially open, casting a jagged slice of light onto the ground. He entered cautiously, muscles tensed. Inside, shadows danced across the concrete floor. Stacks of wooden crates formed eerie silhouettes, and then he heard a small, muffled whimper. Sophie. Relief and anguish warred within him. He forced himself to stay calm. A tall figure emerged from behind the crates. The person's face was concealed by a ski mask. Another masked individual stood beside him, gun in hand. Between them, bound to a chair, was Sophie, her eyes wide with fear, duct tape over her mouth. Seeing her so vulnerable nearly broke Ethan on the spot. "Where's the money?" the tall figure hissed. Ethan held up the duffel bag. "Right here. Let her go first." The gunman took a step forward, weapon raised. "That's not how this works. Hand over the bag and maybe we'll talk about the girl." Ethan's stomach churned. He set the bag down on the floor, sliding it across. "Please, let me see she's okay," he pleaded, his voice cracking. The tall figure tore off the tape from Sophie's mouth. She gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daddy!" she cried, her voice trembling. Ethan's resolve nearly shattered. He wanted to rush forward, but he knew the kidnappers could fire at any moment. He had to wait for Morales' team to make a move. The tall figure began rummaging through the bag. In the dim light, Ethan couldn't be sure whether they suspected the money was fake yet. His pulse hammered against his temples, counting the seconds. Suddenly, the gunman stiffened. "You think we're idiots?" he snarled. "This isn't the full amount. Where's the rest?" Fear splintered through Ethan. He realized they must have known exactly how much money Lena had stolen. He was about to stammer a desperate excuse when a flash of movement came from behind the crates. A loud scuffle broke out as Morales and her team sprang into action. "Police! Drop your weapons!" Morales shouted, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. Pandemonium ensued. The gunman spun around and fired a shot that ricocheted off a metal beam, making sparks fly. Ethan lunged towards Sophie, yanking her chair away from the gunfire. His heart pounded as he tried to shield her with his body. Morales' team returned fire, forcing the kidnappers to duck behind crates. One of the officers rushed to cut Sophie free from the ropes. The tall figure, realizing the ambush, cursed loudly and fled through a side exit, the other kidnapper close behind. "Go, go, go!" Morales yelled, signaling her team to pursue. Ethan held Sophie close, tears mingling with relief as he felt her arms cling to him. A moment later, the warehouse echoed with the sound of heavy boots chasing the criminals. Red and blue lights flashed outside as additional police units screeched to a stop. Within minutes, officers cornered one kidnapper in a loading bay, forcing him to surrender. But the tall figure, seemingly the mastermind, vanished into the night, leaving behind only chaos and unanswered questions. Clutching Sophie, Ethan felt his entire body tremble. She sobbed against his shoulder, and he gently stroked her hair, whispering that she was safe now. Around them, officers secured the scene, calling for paramedics to check Sophie for injuries. Morales approached, her usual composure overshadowed by concern. "Is she hurt?" the detective asked softly. Ethan shook his head. "She's terrified, but I think she's okay." Relief softened Morales' expression. "We've got one of them in custody. Maybe he can tell us more about Lena's role in all this." Ethan swallowed hard. The mention of Lena's name brought a fresh rush of pain and confusion. The ordeal was far from over. Someone, perhaps many people, still wanted the money Lena had stolen, and this was only their first failed attempt to claim it. As he cradled Sophie, Ethan realized that the nightmare had only begun. The criminals now knew he was willing to risk everything to protect his daughter, and from what he could tell, they weren't the type to give up easily. Mornings usually brought comfort and new beginnings, but not in the Sullivan household. After the harrowing events of the previous night, Ethan remained on edge, half expecting another attack. Sophie refused to leave his side, still haunted by the trauma of her abduction. Maggie hovered protectively, offering cups of tea and gentle reassurances. Detective Valeria Morales arrived mid-morning with a folder of documents under her arm. She radiated an aura of urgent determination. The officer, who had been watching the captured kidnapper, reported only vague answers. The man claimed he was just a hired hand paid by someone higher up to snatch Sophie and demand the stolen funds. Inside the living room, Morales sat across from Ethan, Maggie, and Sophie, who clung to a blanket on the couch. The detective's eyes darted briefly to the child before she spoke. "We have reason to believe your wife, Lena, had these people convinced she was sitting on a large fortune. They want it back." Ethan exhaled shakily. "But where is it? If Lena took our money, I don't know where she stashed it. She hasn't contacted me, assuming she's even alive." Morales set the folder on the coffee table. "We're dealing with a criminal network specializing in money laundering. Lena might have arranged a deal with them. And now, they're blaming you for the missing funds." A wave of numbness washed over Ethan. He struggled to reconcile the Lena he had married, a caring, albeit sometimes distant spouse, with a criminal mastermind involved in laundering money. "Is there anything in the investigation that shows me a possible location or a lead?" The detective hesitated, then slid a photograph across the table. "We found this image on the suspect's phone. It's a zoomed-in shot of a key, possibly from a safe deposit box, with your wife's name on a small tag." Ethan's heart thudded. "A key? I found something like that among Lena's belongings. I thought it was just for a storage locker or something trivial." Morales leaned forward. "I have a hunch that key opens a deposit box at a high-end hotel or bank. These criminals are used to stashing money in places where they can move it quickly. It's common practice." Sophie stared at the photograph, confusion clouding her young features. "Why would Mommy have a secret box?" she asked softly. No one answered. The question lingered like a heavy weight in the air. By early afternoon, Ethan and Morales decided to investigate the clue. Maggie remained at home with Sophie, who still needed rest after her terrifying experience. Though the girl protested, Ethan reassured her that staying somewhere safe was the best option. Driving into downtown Boston, Ethan felt his nerves tighten with every passing block. The address Morales had found belonged to a luxury hotel he'd never heard of, one known for its discreet services, including a private bank on the premises catering to wealthy clients. "This place sees high-profile guests," Morales explained as they pulled up to the valet. "Politicians, celebrities, business tycoons, and sometimes criminals looking to hide funds." Inside, the lobby exuded opulence. Marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and hushed conversations echoing through the halls. Morales flashed a badge to a hotel manager, who hesitantly led them to a private banking suite on a lower level. It was decorated in polished wood paneling and serene artwork. The manager's demeanor was polite but guarded. "Detective, I respect the gravity of your investigation, but we maintain strict confidentiality here." Morales offered a faint smile. "We have reason to believe there's a deposit box rented by Lena Sullivan. We need access." After a brief standoff, the manager relented. Moments later, Ethan produced the key he'd found taped under a dresser drawer at home. With a discreet click, the security panel accepted it, and the vault door slid open. Inside, rows of sleek, glass-covered boxes lined the walls. "What number is hers?" Ethan asked. The manager checked a log. "Box 307. Ethan's pulse raced as they approached. Morales gestured for him to insert the key. He paused, bracing himself for what might lie inside, then turned the key. The box popped open with a soft click. Inside, they found a small stack of documents, a USB flash drive, and 2 passports. Ethan lifted the passports, feeling a jolt of shock when he saw Lena's face beneath another name. The second passport showed yet another alias, her photo again, but with a different identity. Fake passports, Morales noted grimly. She was definitely preparing to run. Ethan's hands trembled as he flipped through the documents. Bank statements from offshore accounts, property deeds under false names, and transaction records detailing significant wire transfers. It was a vivid paper trail of Lena's hidden life. The final item was a USB drive, which Ethan pocketed carefully. He felt a mix of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. She planned to leave me, leave Sophie. His voice caught, grief mixing with outrage. All those years, was any of it real? Morales placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. We can't assume everything was a lie. People get trapped in bad situations. Maybe she thought she had no other choice. But Ethan barely heard her words. He stood there staring at the evidence of Lena's calculated betrayal. How could the woman he loved have orchestrated such a scheme? And why? The manager cleared his throat. Detective, is there anything else you need? Morales shook her head. No, we'll be taking these items into evidence. She turned to Ethan. Let's get somewhere safe and analyze this USB. They left the vault, stepping back into the hushed elegance of the hotel corridor. On the drive home, Ethan felt numb, the city lights blurring outside the car window. He caught a reflection of himself in the glass, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. The heartbreak of discovering Lena's secret was almost as crushing as losing her in the first place. Returning to Maggie's house, they found Sophie napping fitfully on the couch, a subdued air hanging over the home. Morales quickly set up her laptop, inserting the USB. The screen lit up with folders containing spreadsheets, transaction logs, and names of individuals possibly connected to Lena's laundering activities. Ethan leaned over, scanning line after line of data. His brain reeled at the sums of money, all suspiciously large and funneled through layers of shell companies. Then, near the bottom, a series of final transfers showed Lena rapidly moving her own cut of the funds into a numbered account in Switzerland. Those last entries are huge, Morales observed, eyebrows knitting together. She must have planned to vanish overseas. A bitter laugh escaped Ethan. While we thought she was busy with volunteer work or meeting friends, she was orchestrating this. I feel like I never knew her. Before the conversation could continue, Ethan's phone buzzed. Another unknown number. His gut twisted. He glanced at Morales, who nodded for him to answer while she activated a recording device. The same distorted voice greeted him. We know you got into that box, Sullivan. We want our money. And since you decided to involve the police last time, you'll pay extra for your betrayal. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to maintain a steady tone. I don't have Lena's money. I only found documents. A pause crackled on the line. She was clever, but not enough. We'll find those funds one way or another. If we have to spill blood, we will. With that, the call ended abruptly. Morales ended the recording and frowned. They know you found Lena's stash of documents. They must have an insider at the hotel or among my own ranks. We need to move carefully. Ethan felt the weight of the world pressing on him. Sophie was safe for the moment, but these criminals clearly weren't done with their threats. Everything pointed to a final showdown, one that would determine not just his fate, but also Sophie's future. Glancing at the sleeping child, Ethan steeled himself. He would protect Sophie at all costs. No matter how deep Lena's betrayals ran, no matter how powerful these criminals were, he refused to let them claim another victim. If Lena truly intended to start a new life, she must have known the possible consequences of double-crossing such dangerous people. Now, Ethan stood in her place, forced to unravel her secrets to save his daughter and himself from the wreckage she had left behind. A tense quiet settled over Maggie Sullivan's house. The initial relief of Sophie's return was overshadowed by the knowledge that the criminals still wanted Lena's money and were willing to go to any length to get it. After analyzing the USB drive, Detective Valeria Morales discovered that most of the laundered funds had been carefully siphoned away to an account in Switzerland, yet no one knew how to access that account or if Lena had already transferred the money elsewhere. Ethan stood by the kitchen sink, staring at his reflection in the window as dusk fell outside. He could barely recognize the haggard face gazing back. heavy circles under his eyes, worry lines etched across his forehead. Maggie busied herself making soup, a half-hearted attempt at normalcy. Sophie was seated at the dining table, coloring quietly, her mood subdued since the kidnapping. Morales paced the living room, fielding calls from various contacts. "Yes, I need more details on the shell companies linked to Lena Sullivan," she said into her phone. "Get me everything, financial records, known associates, addresses." She hung up and turned to Ethan. "We've identified a possible lead. Some of the shell companies were registered by a man named Hector Martinez. He's known for orchestrating cross-border money transfers for organized crime." Ethan frowned. "So Martinez might be the one behind all of this?" Morales paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's one link in the chain, at least. We suspect he's part of a larger network, but if we can trace his activities, maybe we can find out who specifically hired the kidnappers." Sophie let out a small sigh, drawing both adults' attention. "Daddy, am I going to have to hide again?" she asked, voice tinged with anxiety. Ethan gently rubbed her back. "No, sweetheart, I promise we'll keep you safe." Just then, Morales' phone buzzed with an alert. She scanned a text message and quickly grabbed her jacket. "We have to go," she said, her expression grave. "Officers intercepted a tip that a group of armed men were spotted in a warehouse near the harbor. It might be connected to Martinez's operation." Ethan glanced at Sophie, concern swirling in his chest. "I'm coming with you. I can't just sit here and do nothing." Morales hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but stay behind my team, you understand?" Maggie nodded in agreement, offering to stay with Sophie. As Ethan and Morales headed out, Sophie called after her father, tears in her eyes. "Please come back soon." He forced a reassuring smile, promising he would, then slipped out into the chilly night. The drive to the harbor was tense. Morales navigated through winding roads lined with shipping containers and abandoned docks. Eventually, they reached a deserted area bathed in the orange glow of industrial floodlights. A small contingent of police vehicles waited, lights off to maintain the element of surprise. An officer briefed Morales. "We received an anonymous tip that men matching the kidnappers' descriptions are meeting inside a large storage unit. We're ready to breach on your command." Ethan's heart pounded as he listened. If this lead was correct, they might finally dismantle the criminal network chasing Lena's hidden funds. But the risk was enormous. These were dangerous individuals with nothing to lose. Morales turned to Ethan. "Stay by the car. If we apprehend anyone, I might need you to identify them." Before Ethan could protest, the police units moved in. Officers surrounded the warehouse, guns drawn, securing the perimeter. A hush descended as a police megaphone crackled. "This is the Boston Police. Come out with your hands up." For a moment, nothing happened. Then shouting broke out inside, followed by the sound of frantic movement. Police rushed in, and the night erupted with tension. Muffled voices, the clang of metal doors, and the distant echo of boots on concrete sent Ethan's nerves aflame. He waited near the car, adrenaline coursing through him. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, a small group of officers emerged from the warehouse with 2 men in handcuffs. Morales followed close behind, scanning their surroundings for any sign of additional threats. Ethan rushed forward. One of the handcuffed men glared at him with unbridled hatred. The officer holding him barked for him to look away. Morales stepped up to Ethan. "We got a partial confession. These guys are part of Martinez's ring, and they confirmed that Martinez is hell-bent on getting the money Lena stole. Apparently, she was supposed to deliver it, but she never did. It cost them dearly." "Where's Martinez now?" Ethan asked, voice tinged with urgency. She sighed, frustrated. "He slipped away before we arrived, but at least we have a clue. They plan to demand a ransom again soon. They think you can still produce Lena's fortune." Ethan's phone suddenly buzzed, making both of them jump. The caller ID was unknown. Bracing himself, he answered. A chillingly calm voice spoke. "Sullivan, I see you've been busy with the police. A bold move. We know your wife kept detailed records. If you want to avoid another tragedy, you'll deliver those records to us. It's the only way to settle her debt." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "I don't have her money, and you know it." The line stayed silent for a moment. Bring the files to the Millstone warehouse off Highway 9. Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Alone, or you and your daughter will live to regret it." The call ended abruptly, leaving Ethan's heart hammering in his chest. He stared at Morales, who had heard the conversation. "They want Lena's files. That might be the only leverage we have." She nodded, her expression grim. "We can set a trap. If we can lure Martinez out of hiding, we have a chance to arrest him. But it's risky." Together, they returned to Maggie's house, minds spinning with plans. Sophie was asleep, her small face stained with dried tears. Ethan tucked her in more securely, heart aching at the thought of putting her in further danger. Yet he knew this confrontation was inevitable. Early the next day, Morales assembled a carefully chosen team. They pored over maps of the Millstone warehouse, strategizing vantage points for a potential takedown. Meanwhile, Ethan prepared copies of the incriminating documents from Lena's USB, evidence that could expose the criminal's entire operation. If Martinez wanted the data, he'd have to reveal himself. As dusk settled once more, a somber atmosphere enveloped the Sullivan home. Maggie embraced Ethan, her voice trembling. "Please end this, for Sophie's sake." He kissed his mother's forehead and forced a confident nod. "I'll do my best." By 8:30 p.m., Ethan was parked outside the Millstone warehouse, an abandoned structure near a stretch of deserted highway. Morales and her team stayed out of sight, monitoring from hidden positions. The tension was almost palpable. Ethan gripped a slim briefcase containing the printed documents. With a final steadying breath, he stepped from his car into the chilly night air, the wind whipping at his jacket. He entered the vast, dimly lit interior of the warehouse, every sense on high alert. "Hello?" he called, voice echoing. "I have the files." A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into a sliver of light. It was Martinez, a lean, middle-aged man with slicked-back hair and a thin scar running across his cheek. His eyes glinted with something predatory as he regarded Ethan. "Set it down," Martinez ordered, gesturing toward a nearby crate. Ethan approached slowly, placing the briefcase on the crate. "Where's Sophie's guarantee? How do I know you won't come after us again?" A low, mocking laugh. "You don't. But if these documents are what we need, we'll consider your debt paid. If not, well, let's hope for your sake you're not wasting my time." With a nod, Martinez beckoned another man to retrieve the briefcase. As the henchman opened it and flipped through the pages, Martinez's expression grew darker. "This is only part of what we need. Where are the offshore account numbers? The passwords?" Ethan's stomach churned. "That's everything Lena left behind. Martinez lunged forward, grabbing Ethan by the collar. "Don't lie to me," he hissed. "Your wife stole millions from us." A sudden commotion came from the far side of the warehouse. Morales and her team burst in, guns drawn. "Freeze! Put your hands up!" In a flash, Martinez shoved Ethan aside and reached for his own weapon. Shots rang out, echoing through the cavernous space. Ethan dove behind a stack of crates, heart pounding in his ears. He peeked around to see a chaotic scramble. Martinez's henchmen returned fire, bullets ricocheting off metal beams. Morales took cover behind a concrete column, issuing orders into her radio. Her officers advanced carefully, corralling Martinez's men. A volley of gunfire erupted, the muzzle flashes illuminating the gloom in bursts of orange light. Ethan huddled against the crate, adrenaline surging. He wasn't armed, and fear clutched at him. Then, from a vantage point, he spotted Martinez trying to flee through a side door. If the kingpin escaped, the danger to Sophie would persist. Summoning courage, Ethan dashed across the open space, ignoring the staccato of gunshots nearby. He reached the doorway just as Martinez yanked it open. They collided in a violent impact, sending Martinez stumbling backward. "Stay out of my way," Martinez snarled, raising his gun. Ethan instinctively grabbed for Martinez's arm, wrestling it aside. A shot fired into the ground, the sound deafening. They grappled, both men fueled by desperation. One to escape with his criminal empire intact, the other to protect everything he held dear. In that moment, Morales appeared, her weapon trained on Martinez. "Drop it," she commanded, her voice slicing through the chaos. Martinez froze, beads of sweat on his brow. The gun clattered to the floor as officers swarmed in. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists, and the tension in the air slowly dissipated, replaced by a palpable wave of relief. Ethan staggered back, gulping in ragged breaths. Morales' eyes met his. "You okay?" He nodded, unable to speak. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him both exhausted and exhilarated. Around them, officers secured the scene, cuffing the last of Martinez's men. A sense of finality settled over the warehouse, as though the ghosts of Lena's actions were finally being laid to rest. Outside, red and blue lights flashed across the desolate lot. Paramedics checked Ethan's bruises, offering him a blanket to ward off the chill of the night air. Morales emerged from the building, a victorious yet solemn look on her face. "We've got Martinez," she said, exhaling. "He'll face federal charges for money laundering, kidnapping, attempted murder, you name it." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him. "Does this mean Sophie is finally safe?" Morales gave him a reassuring nod. "With the leader of this ring in custody, the rest will soon fall apart. He'll probably give up any remaining associates in exchange for a deal." A flicker of sadness crossed Ethan's features. He couldn't help but wonder if Lena had known the depth of the danger she'd unleashed. Regardless, the immediate threat was contained, and Sophie no longer needed to live in fear. As dawn approached, Ethan drove back to Maggie's house. He found Sophie awake, waiting anxiously in the living room. At the sight of him, she ran forward, relief shining in her tear-filled eyes. "You're home!" she cried, hugging him tightly. He wrapped his arms around her, tears pricking his own eyes. "I'm here. Everything's going to be all right now." Maggie stood nearby, eyes misty with gratitude. She joined the embrace, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they felt the possibility of true peace. Yet in the back of Ethan's mind, one question remained. Lena might never be found. The woman he married and the double life she led would always cast a shadow over their memories. But as he held Sophie close, he knew one truth with absolute certainty. No matter what the past held, the future was theirs to shape, and they would face it together. The quiet calm that settled over Maggie Sullivan's home felt almost unreal after the chaos of the last few weeks. Sophie was safe. The criminal ring that had terrorized them lay in shambles following Hector Martinez's arrest. Yet Ethan Sullivan couldn't shake the sense that something about Lena's disappearance remained unresolved. Every step he took through the house reminded him that she had once been part of this family. Early one morning, Ethan found himself in the living room, staring at the digital clock on the mantel. Time seemed to pass in fits and starts, as though he were waiting for something, some final revelation that would put Lena's ghost to rest. Sophie was still asleep, curled up in her bedroom. Maggie, sipping tea in the kitchen, gave him a concerned glance every now and then. She understood he was wrestling with questions no one could answer. Detective Valeria Morales arrived later that day, her expression carefully composed. She set a folder on the coffee table and invited Ethan to sit. Maggie joined them, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I've gathered the final reports," Morales said. "Martinez has been cooperative in exchange for a lighter sentence. According to him, Lena made arrangements to launder a huge sum of money. She promised delivery, then vanished. He claims she faked her death to escape both him and the rest of the syndicate." Ethan stared at the folder, a mix of anger and heartbreak tightening his chest. So it's confirmed then. Lena never intended to stay. She planned all along to leave Sophie and me behind. Morales studied him for a moment. "He believes that, but we still have no direct proof, no sightings of Lena, no transactions after the accident date. It's like she dropped off the face of the earth." Maggie cleared her throat. "Is it possible she truly died in that crash, and the criminals just assume otherwise?" "Possible," Morales admitted, "but unlikely. The evidence from the bank records indicates she prepared a new identity. We also can't ignore the fact that no body was ever found." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I keep asking myself why. Why go through all this? Why leave Sophie? Tears gathered in Maggie's eyes as she listened. Morales exhaled. There's no easy answer. Some people get tangled in things beyond their control, or they change in ways we can't understand. At that moment, Sophie padded into the living room, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She noticed the folder and the somber faces, then asked softly, "Are we talking about Mom?" Ethan hesitated before nodding. "Yes, sweetie. We're trying to figure out what really happened." Sophie sat beside him, her small hand reaching for his. "Even if she left, she's still my mom, right?" His heart twisted. "Of course," he whispered, arms wrapping around her in a protective embrace. In that moment, Ethan realized his love for Sophie had to be stronger than the bitterness he felt toward Lena. Whatever Lena's choices, Sophie deserved to remember some glimmer of her mother's love, even if it was only in distant memories. Morales stood, sensing the conversation had reached a personal turning point. "I'll leave you with these documents. They represent the final steps in the investigation. If Lena surfaces, we'll know. In the meantime, there's nothing more I can do." Ethan rose and walked her to the door. Before leaving, she paused, her voice quiet. "You're free to move on now, Ethan. Whatever Lena did, it doesn't define the life you can build for Sophie." He nodded. Gratitude and sorrow mixed in his eyes. When he closed the door behind her, it felt like shutting a chapter of his life, even if the ending remained ambiguous. Later that evening, as the sky darkened, Ethan stepped out onto the porch. Maggie had gone to bed, and Sophie had fallen asleep in front of the television. The gentle chirping of crickets mingled with the distant hum of cars. He wondered if Lena might be out there, watching from the shadows. The thought made his chest tighten, a swirl of anger and longing all at once. But instead of letting it consume him, he took a deep breath. Morales was right. He had to live beyond this tragedy. Sophie needed him whole, not haunted by the mother who might never return. The day's revelations were painful, but they offered a kind of freedom. No more kidnappers at the door, no more hidden keys or cryptic phone calls. He walked back inside, locking the door behind him. A sense of finality settled in the house. Though questions lingered, the immediate danger had passed. Now, it was time to confront the reality that Lena might never come back, and that he and Sophie had to keep going, one day at a time. Several months passed in a soft blur of healing and change. Ethan decided to leave the hustle of Boston behind, relocating to a quieter suburb just outside the city. With Maggie's help, he found a small house with a neat yard, a short drive from Sophie's new school. Bright mornings brought the scent of freshly cut grass, and evenings were filled with frogs croaking by a nearby creek. The transition wasn't without its difficulties. Sophie struggled with nightmares at first, waking in the middle of the night, calling out for her dad. But slowly she began to settle in. The local children welcomed her with curious smiles, and she made a few friends in her class. For Ethan, seeing her laugh again, a genuine carefree laugh, felt like a balm to the wounds left by Lena's betrayals. Detective Valeria Morales visited them periodically. At first it was purely for follow-up on the case, but soon her visits became more personal. She'd arrive with a bag of takeout or homemade cookies, and they'd sit on the porch, sharing stories about their days. A subtle bond formed between them, built on the shared trials they had survived. One crisp autumn afternoon, Morales showed up unannounced, wearing a casual jacket and jeans. She looked around at the yard, where Sophie was attempting a handstand on the grass. "You've settled in nicely," she observed, smiling as Sophie toppled over, giggling. Ethan leaned against the porch railing. "It's peaceful here. Sophie's happier, and that's what matters." Morales joined him on the porch steps. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a nearby chimney. After a brief silence, she asked, "How are you holding up with everything? Any more thoughts about Lena?" He sighed, gazing at the horizon. "I still wonder what really happened, but I've accepted we might never know. I just want Sophie to have a chance at a normal life. They shared a long look, an unspoken understanding passing between them. In the weeks that followed, Morales came by more frequently, helping Sophie with homework, cheering from the sidelines at her school's autumn festival. Over time, the detective and father began to realize their connection ran deeper than just a shared crisis. One day, while Maggie was visiting, Ethan admitted he had grown fond of Valeria, maybe more than fond. Maggie smiled knowingly, gently encouraging him not to let the past ruin any chance at future happiness. Her words echoed in his mind as he considered opening his heart again, despite the heartbreak Lena had left behind. During winter, a thin blanket of snow covered the suburb and holiday decorations lined the streets. Morales was invited over for Christmas Eve dinner, sharing a meal of roast turkey and mashed potatoes with Ethan, Sophie, and Maggie. Laughter filled the house, and a subtle warmth blossomed that night. When Morales left, Sophie pulled Ethan aside and whispered, "I like her, Dad. She makes you smile." Ethan's heart swelled at his daughter's earnest confession. Indeed, for the first time since Lena's disappearance, he felt something close to genuine peace. And that peace made space for the tender feelings he realized he had for Morales. In the spring, the relationship between Ethan and Morales shifted from companionship to something deeper. They shared their first tentative kiss under the bright blooms of a cherry blossom tree in the local park. Sophie, watching from a safe distance, whooped in delight before running over to tease them. Maggie, too, offered her blessing, relieved to see Ethan moving beyond his grief. By the time summer arrived, they were a couple in every sense of the word. Together, they took Sophie to amusement parks, local fairs, and Sunday picnics by the river. Sometimes, remnants of Ethan's pain surfaced, like when he caught sight of a car similar to Lena's or came across an old family photo. But he no longer felt defined by the memories of betrayal. With each passing day, the new life they built grew stronger. Sophie thrived in her new environment, her once frequent nightmares replaced by the usual worries of a child her age. Homework deadlines, soccer practice, and making sure she got the best part in the school play. Morales remained a steady presence, offering both emotional support and a maternal kindness that Sophie came to adore. One afternoon, Ethan found himself alone in the house, rummaging through old boxes for a misplaced item. He stumbled upon a photograph of Lena, holding a newborn Sophie. The picture felt like a distant relic of a life he no longer lived. Staring at Lena's face, he felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of closure. He gently placed the photo in a small keepsake box, letting go of the bitterness that once consumed him. Stepping back outside, he watched Sophie and Morales play catch in the yard. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting everything in golden hues. Maggie observed from a lawn chair, a satisfied smile on her lips. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt grounded in the present. Though Lena's absence lingered as an unsolved mystery, it no longer dominated his every thought. He had found a way forward by choosing to live, to love, and to embrace the gift of every new day. 2 years slipped by, weaving a tapestry of hope and renewal. On a bright early spring morning, Ethan Sullivan stood on a porch that overlooked a blooming garden. He turned at the sound of laughter inside the house, where Sophie, now 10, was trying to teach a puppy new tricks. The dog barked playfully, stumbling over its oversized paws. Meanwhile, Valeria Morales, now simply Valeria to him, emerged from the hallway, her hand resting gently on a pregnant belly. The warmth in her eyes radiated as she caught Ethan's gaze. He stepped forward and placed a soft kiss on her forehead, a small gesture that spoke volumes about their journey. The last few years had not been easy. Shadows of Lena's betrayal still surfaced occasionally. A stray news article hinting at unsolved criminal cases, or a rare phone call from an old acquaintance fishing for more information. But the once constant fear and uncertainty had faded, replaced by routines of family dinners, weekend outings, and the quiet joys of everyday life. Maggie was there too, sitting in a wicker chair admiring the young rose bushes lining the yard. She beamed as Sophie successfully coaxed the puppy to sit, clapping in encouragement. The child's bright laughter filled the air, a testament to her resilience and the healing time could bring. At mid-morning, they all decided to pay a brief visit to a small memorial site dedicated to Lena. There was no gravestone with remains, only a modest plaque set beneath a flowering dogwood tree in a nearby park. It served as a symbolic place for Sophie to leave notes or flowers for the mother she barely remembered. Despite everything, Ethan believed it was important to honor that piece of Sophie's heritage. They arrived at the tree, the branches heavy with pale pink blossoms. Sophie placed a single white lily at the base, then stepped back, her expression serene. Ethan stood beside her, memories flitting through his mind like a silent montage. The first time he and Lena danced in their tiny apartment, the day Sophie was born. The phone calls that shattered their trust. Valeria looped her arm through his, sensing his emotions. Maggie lingered behind them, allowing father and daughter a moment of privacy. The breeze carried the scent of flowers, tangling it with the echo of unspoken regrets. "Goodbye, Mom," Sophie whispered, her voice gentle. "I hope you're at peace, wherever you are." Ethan inhaled a steadying breath, then added in a soft tone, "We're okay now. We've learned how to be happy again." They stood there for a quiet moment, letting the silence honor everything that had happened. The love, the betrayals, and the unexpected path that led them to this very day. Then, hand in hand, they walked away from the plaque, leaving behind the burdens of the past. Back at home, they settled around the kitchen table. Valeria's due date was only a few weeks away, and the conversation drifted to the baby names Sophie had been brainstorming. Maggie offered old family names, while Sophie insisted on something modern and cool. Laughter filled the room as they tossed playful suggestions around. Even in the midst of laughter, Ethan felt a wave of contentment wash over him. Life had taken a shape he never anticipated, one defined by second chances, new beginnings, and the unbreakable bond of love. The past might never fully be resolved, but the future was theirs to embrace, with all its uncertainties and joys. As the afternoon sun cast long rays across the kitchen floor, Ethan's eyes caught Valeria's, and he smiled. They were building a family rooted, not in secrets, but in honesty, shared hopes, and a promise to stand together no matter what. In that simple moment, amid gentle conversation and the fluttering kicks of new life, he knew they had finally found the peace that once seemed so out of reach.